Welcome everyone to the IBC webinar, and I'm very excited that we're here on time. My name is Njideka Abu, and I'm the West African Director for the IABC. And with us are fantastic veterans who will be sharing their lived experiences. We already know that some of you here have questions that you have. And we believe that this is a wonderful opportunity to share your questions. The IABC is, I wouldn't say arguably, I would say that it's the best place where you can find this sort of professionals who are able to respond to the questions that you have and been extended for a number of years. In fact, should I say more than over 50 years now. And we've been able to contribute to the professional space, the communications professional space in many ways that have impacted the lives of people who are professionals. And this webinar is about policy and communication. And yes, we'd love people to drop their names, drop where they are also joining us from. And I would let Christiana, who is our moderator, take over from here. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Njideka. Hi, everyone. If you can hear me clearly and if you're with us, please introduce yourself in the chat, your name and your location. My name is Christiana Robinson, and I'm joining you from London, Ontario. Thank you. So Njideka, maybe we just move to the panel profiles. Okay, so today we're kicking off today's webinar with one simple rule. And I know some of you may think that I'm setting this rule because I'm trying to protect myself, but I guess that's why I've been appointed the moderator for today's session, which means that I get to set the tone for the discussion, right? And now, what is the rule? The rule is, for those of us who are in Nigeria, I'm sure that you would be very familiar with this rule. We listen, we don't judge. That's the rule. So when I say we listen, we don't judge, you understand what I mean, right? So can somebody help me put that in the chat? We listen, we don't judge. And yes, you may say that, oh, Christy, are you trying to protect yourself ahead of something? Well, I'm the moderator, like I said earlier. So in this session, once again, our rule is we listen. Thank you so much, Faith. We listen, we don't judge. Thank you so much. If you've not dropped your name and your location, please, I would love for you to do that. I'm very conscious of the fact that we have limited time for the kind of industry leaders that Njideka has brought together to speak to us today. Now, while I will be asking our panelists a series of questions, I've also got questions for you, my audience. And the first question is, am I the only communications professionals who used to run away from policy or who runs away from policy? I don't know, maybe it's because of the technical jargons, maybe it's because of the 100 policy documents that they put together, but I've always just felt that, policy is a very technical space. Like we said, we listen, we don't judge. So you're not allowed to judge me. All I need you to tell me in the chat is, oh, Christy, you're not alone. I also feel the same way about policy. But I believe that that's why today's session has been set up. It's to break every myth or every misconception that we've had about policy. Another question that I would have for you, my audience, is when you hear policy, what comes to mind? Right? So it's not just our panelists that will be on the hot seat today. Even our audience have to be on the hot seats. So when you hear the word policy or public policy, what comes to mind? I'm curious to see what is in the chat. Hi, Bemiga, welcome. Michael, we're still introducing ourselves. Great. Hi, Hamilton. Hi, Amanda, welcome. Hi, Madam Shola Bulu, good to have you on the call with us. So when you hear the word policy, I'm not moving on until we answer that question. When you hear the word policy, what comes to mind? Because I know that a lot of you have questions. You want to bombard our panelists today. you want to ask them questions, and you're forgetting that Christy came prepared for you as well. So when you hear policy, what comes to mind? Fabulous legal frameworks and ways of working. Thank you so much, Camilla. Amanda says this is the way things will be done. Brilliant. Legal frameworks again, guidelines, Faith. Thank you. Obadiah, okay, Obadiah is introducing himself. Loveth says guidelines. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Thank you so much for that. Okay, brilliant, brilliant. Christine is our chair for IABC Africa. And Christine says boring work to be done. I mean, if Christine says that, who am I to argue? Like I said earlier, I never used to like policy until I realized that if I want to climb up the corporate ladder, I have no choice. We need to be best of friends. So thank you so much, Christine, for that. That's the most realistic, definition that I've seen so far. Boring work to be done. Amazing. Thank you, Christine, once again. Okay. Let's keep the responses coming. And while we do that, I would love to introduce our panelists. So I know that Inkem and team are helping me put the slides up so as we, talk about our panelists this afternoon. And it's also important for us to know that around the world, governments, development institutions, businesses invest enormous time and resources designing policies, programs, and even reforms. And many are technically sound, and backed by evidence and with the best of intentions, but yet too often they fail to achieve the intended impact. And that's why we're here today. We're here to break down, to dissect, why these policies do not achieve their intended impact, right? So is the problem the policy itself? Is it poor implementation, or are we overlooking something equally important, which is the way people understand, experience, and respond to change? Because at the end of the day, people are not robots, right? And you cannot just toss people around. You need to treat them like the human beings that they are. So, and that's why we have today joining me are three distinguished leaders whose work span governance, strategic communications, and development practice. Together today, we will examine what happens when good ideas meet public perception, when it also meets institutional trust and human behavior. And I'm officially welcoming you once again, especially if you're just joining us, to the IABC West Africa Interest Group webinar. Can I get a drum roll in the chat? Drum roll, please. Thank you. So we're going to start with Dr. Joe. So we're going to start with Dr. Joe. How many people know Dr. Joe? Like we said, we listen, we speak, we don't judge. How many people know Dr. Joe? Oh, fantastic. I'm seeing the thumbs up. Amazing. Amazing. A lot of people actually. Now I see why we have a lot of people on this call. Thank you. Thank you for that. So Dr. Joe is a very respectable or respected leader, not just in Africa, but across, the global stage. Dr. Joe prioritizes communication and public engagement, especially while he was in government. He was the first appointee of government to use a public opinion poll to set the work plan for his agency. He was also the first to publicly declare his assets on social media and to subject his budget proposals to public scrutiny before submission to the National Assembly. I mean, it takes a lot of courage for someone to do that, to submit himself. Yes, I agree with you. He's an institution of his own, on his own. Can we give Dr. Joe a round of applause in the comments? I mean, I don't think I'll be able to cover his entire profile. You could just, look through. And like I said, he's such, like someone said in the comment section, is an asset on his own, is an institution on his own, is an organization, whatever word you want to use to describe Dr. Joe. That's who he is. He's who he thinks he is, right? So please let's welcome Dr. Joe, so beautifully in the comment section. Let's tell him we're excited to have him. We are honored, not just excited, we're actually honored to have him. Thank you so much, Dr. Joe, for joining us today. Another person that I have on the panel today is Gifty. She's actually Gifty, not Gift. So please pardon all of us that put the slides together. She's Gifty, and Gifty is a strategic communications leader. Gifty has over 28 years experience across private and public sectors. She has led communications for corporate, government, and multilateral institutions, including the African Union's peace support operations in Somalia, where communication was central to policy delivery. I mean, I actually saw someone, I've been seeing people joining this group or this call because of Gifty. Yes, because of Gifty. I've been seeing people join this call because of Gifty. Gifty is trained at the Ghana Institute of Journalism, the University of Leeds, and the Chartered Institute of Public Relations, UK, with executive communication, emphasis on the executive education at the Harvard Kennedy School. Please put an underline that sentence, Harvard Kennedy School. Underline that name, please. Thank you so much, Gifty, for joining us today. We are really honored to have you on this call. I don't know how my sister Njideka pulled this through, bringing such brilliant, amazing, incredible institutions to this call today. But we're not done. We have another distinguished leader who is joining us again from, where do I even start from? Where do I start from? Somebody please help me in the chat. Where do I start from? If you've not met Mr. Paul, or if you don't know him, maybe you need to upgrade or you need to upskill in the comms and policy space. So Mr. Paul is a policy analyst. He's also a strategic communications consultant. But the highlights for me is that he has previously served as a special advisor on media and communications to Nigeria's coordinating minister for the economy and minister of finance, where he led communications for landmark national initiatives. Oh my goodness, where do I start from? Thank you so much, Mr. Paul, for joining us today. We're really honored, we are humbled to have you on this call. If you had joined earlier, you must have heard the banter that was happening between Dr. Joe and Mr. Paul. If you look at their camera, you'd see that Mr. Paul is currently wearing a cap. And, Dr. Joe almost left the call to go get his own cap as well, so. So it's such an honor to have this panel on this call. Thank you so much for joining us. Njideka, do you want to check if people have started answering my questions? My questions, especially the one around policy, because until then, we probably will not be asking our panel, our panelists their own questions. So what comes to your mind when you think of policy? When you think of strategic communications and policy, what comes to your mind? So we're going to dive straight into it. And I'm going to start with an opening question for all of our panelists. But I would love for Dr. Joe to go first. I mean, a lot of people have been itching to hear your voice, and it's not a surprise, and you can only understand why. So when you hear of the phrase strategic communication, what do you think most leaders still misunderstand about it, Dr. Joe? As someone who has had decades of experience in communications and policy, when you hear the phrase strategic communications, what do you think most leaders misunderstand about it?
Thank you very much, Christiana. It's a real pleasure to have been invited to be part of this webinar. And before I answer your question, let me do a very brief introduction to to public policy so that you're not as scared of it as you said you were. Policy is basically a set of decisions you take from different options. And when government does it, it's called public policy. So there are different options, and then you take certain decisions that this is where I'm going to go. And in our private lives, we also have policies. So I have a policy of not taking revenge, as an example. Some other person could have a policy of always taking revenge. Government could have a policy of prioritizing small and medium enterprises and growing the economy through supporting small and medium enterprises. Another government could have a policy of supporting big business in the thinking that that big business is what to pull up the smaller suppliers and other business people. And you have all sorts of policies. You have policies that constrain you. So as an example, you cannot own a firearm in Nigeria without a license. So unlike in the US, where you can go to Walmart and buy a gun, you can't do that. You can't do that in Nigeria. So that's a restrictive policy. You have redistributive ones. So we're no longer paying fuel subsidy. We're now giving all our money to the governors. Whether that's a good thing or not is beside the point, but you get my point. So I don't want you to be scared about policy. It's simply a set of decisions, and quite often there's no right or wrong policy as such, so long as the interest of the public is served. Because as our Constitution says, the welfare and security of the people shall be the primary purpose of government. So long as that policy is contributing to the welfare and security of the people, then that is what you judge. That's what you judge policy by. I know why you would have said you were scared, because there are people that do all sorts of quantitative analysis and econometrics and all of that makes it all sound really complex. But were done properly, backed by data and supported by public consultation. That really is what policy is about. Okay, so what do I think many people hear when they hear the word
strategic communications?
Yeah, when they hear the word strategic communications. So you had asked everyone to write down that we listen,
we don't judge.
Okay, in government, we judge, we don't listen. And that's the primary difference, I would say. But I think many people don't understand what strategic communication means, and they interpret it as, the same way as governors call themselves executive governor. And then you think, okay, so but why the executive? Is there a legislative governor? Is there a judicial governor? You are the governor. Why do you call yourself executive? Is in the same way that people use the word strategic communication, because they just think it sounds more posh. But the challenge we have in the way we communicate is that quite often we don't, actually. So if you take as an example, we have a Ministry of Information. So even by its very name, you can tell that it's just there to provide information. It's a one-way kind of function. And then you have special advisors to the president on media, whose job is to insult everybody that criticizes the president. What you don't have, which is a gap I tried to fill when I was DG, was somebody actually trying to explain government policy. So this is what this policy is trying to achieve. This is why we've taken this option instead of the other one. This is where we think you'll get us to, and this is why we need your support on it. We don't have that function within our government at the moment. But strategic communication is essentially how you can change the mindset of people by engaging with them. So, but I'm the only one who's not a communications expert on the panel. So I'm sure there are many people that will correct me when I'm wrong. But when I use strategic communication, it is because I want you to believe something about me or about my organization or about the function that I lead. And so all of my communication is deliberate. Right? It is not defensive like you often have in government, where
True.
you don't communicate anything. You wait for people to attack you and then you start to defend. Strategic communication, puts a foot forward. This is where we're going. This is why we're doing it. We want to hear from you how we could adjust it and make it and tailor it to your advantage. But everybody gets that feeling that they understand where this effort is going. That is what is often lacking in my view.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joe. That's really brilliant. And Madam Shola Bulus aligns, she agrees with you. She says, I like that, Dr. Joe. I like to carry my audience along, right? So please pardon me while I, try to read some of the comments. I fully agree with that, judging without listening. How you can change the minds of people by engaging with them strategically. Like Dr. Joe had said, he believes that Mr. Paul and Gifty are more of the comms, experts than he is. So I would like them to also shed lights on that, question, in addition to everything that Dr. Joe had said. Mr. Paul? Do you want to?
Yes, I've unmuted myself. I was trying to be a gentleman by letting Gifty do the honors first.
Don't worry, Gifty has a moment.
He called me, so I have to obey the last order. I think Dr. Abah, Dr. Joe Abah has done a fantastic job of explaining what strategic communication is all about. And I think that we strategic communicators are lucky that he's not in our field because he'll give us a lot of trouble and competition. Yeah, so basically strategic communications is the strategic use of communication to achieve clear objectives in favor of an organization, government, business, whatever. And I like what Dr. Joe said about simplifying it, because there's a tendency to make communication sound like something that only experts do. But my personal belief is that communication is ultimately for people, and people must be part of that process. And that's why, for instance, if I'm putting together a strategic communications plan or something, I always make sure that I talk not only to the experts, but also to other people in the space, stakeholders and all that. So so it has many dimensions, and in the course of my career, I have dealt with communication from the perspective of a journalist. I have dealt with communication from the perspective of an advertising creative person with inside communication more than 30 years ago. I've also had several stints in what you may call intellectual journalism as members of editorial boards and all that. I've also worked in government, like you said, and there are many ways to look at strategic communication, because for me, I am a message person. I'm primarily a message person because I believe that the most important product of strategic communications is not the plan or the sophisticated analysis and econometrics, as Dr. Joe said, but the final thing, the final message that you expose to the consumer or the targets of that campaign. That is the most important thing. And if because it's important to make that point, because there's a tendency for people who to do what I call concept note communication. They just regurgitate and dump what they have in their concept note, which they and the other technocrats are very familiar with. They dump them on the public. And in the process, they lose the public, and there's a lot of groupthink in communication and all that. So I believe that one has to keep it in mind that keep the ultimate target of communication in mind. And the messaging is so important, because if you do that, then you're not going to do the kind of things that Dr. Joe was talking about earlier, where people write powerful rejoinders defending government instead of listening and trying to understand what the public thinks and wants, because they are more focused. Their target sometimes is actually their audience, actually their bosses, who they defend, with these powerful rejoinders, and in the process, of course, they defend. In the process, they may make their bosses happy, but the public ends up being very hostile to them. One of the things I noticed in the government is that there are many government people who are shocked when they leave government, and they discover how much they are hated. But people wrote powerful rejoinders on their behalf, but they were the audience, they were happy, but the real audience out there didn't know what they were doing. So I just want to, as part of my summary, say that if you keep the audience, the target, in this case, the people in mind, and you show and you reflect their concerns, their preferences in a respectful way, they will also respond positively to you. But if you decide that you want to talk only to your technocrat friends, or that you want to talk to the investors who are benefiting in the midst of suffering, then whatever you get, you take it like that. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mr. Paul. I totally agree with you. Most policy messaging are regurgitated, in other term, recycled. I like to use the word recycled. So that's pretty clear. For those who don't know, Mr. Paul is actually a reputation, expert, a reputation management expert, and he's also the CEO of I&R Communications. So if you're not following him on LinkedIn, you're going to be missing a lot. I'll let.
Myself, go ahead.
What did you say, Mr. Paul?
I will say that I hope I'm on LinkedIn, but go ahead.
No, I can see you on LinkedIn. In fact, I'm connected with you on LinkedIn.
Oh, thank you.
So Gifty, over to you.
Thank you. The advantage of speaking last is that it's easy to say that both doctors have said it. But I think for me, what makes communication strategic is that you are using it to achieve very specific outcomes, right? So we do it, and we do it every day, right? So the whole point is you need to change perception, you need to push a certain agenda, whether you work for your organization or you work for a government, because don't forget, in policy formulation, everybody has an interest and everybody has an agenda. So if you're working for a particular institution, what you would use strategic communication to do is to push the agenda, which is sort of in the interest of your organization, in the midst of everybody else trying to push an agenda as well. So even for you and for several others who are on this call, I'm sure on a daily basis, there are different things that we do to push an agenda. Of course, if you work on the government side, it's a little bit different than when you work on the private sector side, and having worked at both. So in an organization, I have a corporate background. You're using it to push a certain agenda, to push a certain reputation, to drive a certain goal, which is directly linked to your business organization, whether your business is a profitable one where it has revenue implications, or your business is an open one which does not necessarily have revenue implications. You would sort of use strategic communication to achieve this. And what makes it strategic communication is not necessarily the branding element, right? So it's just being purposeful and planning, deliberately communication with a goal tied to it. A typical example would be in some of the roles I've been in the AU, for instance. You will deal with member states, you will deal with troop contributing countries, you're dealing with host country. All these different parties are there. And don't forget, every organization has set of policies. These policies keep changing over a period. So you use strategic communication to push agendas that are in the interest of the organization you're in. You could also use it in the corporate side. Let's take it. For instance, one of the topical issues in Ghana now is the potential ban on plastic waste. If I worked in corporate and I worked for an organization that manufactures plastic, if government puts in place that policy, it has implication. It has implication for employment. It has implication for revenue. It has implication for even the raw materials we have, right? Beyond us, for government as well, it has implications because it spends so much money on waste disposal and the rest. Beyond that, even the lady or gentleman who sells water along the street, it has implications because she's able to buy sachet water and sell it cheaply. Now, if you're banning it, it has implications for it. Even the market woman, it has implications because she rubs every time a customer buys, she sticks it into a plastic bag, right? So if you work on the business side, for me, it would be as a business comms, what does this mean? It means our prices are going to, it means our business model essentially is being challenged. So how do we come in here? How do we contribute to that policy? That's where you would sit and use strategic communication to be deliberate. Are there opportunities for us to look at alternatives? Are there opportunities for us to even stagger the policy over a period? And it could be a number of things. It could be what you do openly. It could be closed door meetings. It could be public fora. In our part of the world, sometimes it can even be demonstration to put pressure on government. So I don't think, none of us should worry too much and shroud it into some big word and some big secrecy, because I think for a lot of us communication professionals, we use it daily. It's just, we try to position it like, yeah, we're not part of it. This is the legal people, but, we face it on a daily basis.
I mean, I like the examples that you've just highlighted, Gifty. They're actually very realistic, very practical. It starts from like the market woman, into the work that we do in our respective places. And it has also prompted a question that I would love to ask the panelists, but I think I'll put it on hold for now. And I would rather ask our audience this question. If strategic communication disappears from your organization today, what would break first? I'm curious to know what people think or what people have to say. Even though I know that our panelists can do justice to this question, but everything that Gifty has said, just point us into the right direction of, the importance of strategic communications, especially to organizations. So if strategic communication breaks in your organization today or disappears, if your leadership team or your board members say, oh, we do not even need a strategic communicator anymore, what would break first in your organization? I'm curious to know what a lot of people have to say about this. And, while I move on to asking Dr. Joe this question, I'm hoping that we can get responses to that question and come back to it later. Especially because we're running out of time. Njidika, she would always remind me that Christy, she would always remind me, and she's in my DM already. So, Dr. Joe, throughout your career in public sector reform as Director General, oh my goodness, I remember when I used to go to NAVDAC. So this Director General, rings the bell a lot. Was there a moment when you realized the greatest obstacle wasn't the policy itself, but how people understood it?
It's an interesting question, Christiana, because you need to start with how policy is developed. Because if policy is developed properly, then there's unlikely to be a misunderstanding of what it is. And so when you ask whether it is the policy itself or how people understood it, it sort of suggests that the policy was developed without the people, and therefore they're just being told, and maybe they may or may not understand it. But that's not the proper way to do it. So when we teach policy, we go through something called a policy cycle. So it starts with, okay, we have a problem. right? You identify that there's a problem, and that problem could be we're not raising enough taxes. We're not talking about increasing taxes. We're just not collecting enough from the taxes we already have. So the very starting point of your conversation, of your policy making, is engendering that discussion to let people understand that actually there are a lot of rich people who don't pay taxes or don't pay enough taxes and all of that. So that's the first thing. That's the first thing you do, is to identify that there's a problem, and then there's an agenda that needs to be set. Okay, and that agenda will be, yeah, we want to fix this. How do we go about fixing it? And then you start to get people to talk about, okay, what kind of policies should we put in place? Should people who earn over a certain amount pay more? Should somebody who is just a market trader have to pay tax? Somebody that earns, 250,000 naira a month, should they really be paying tax when there are very many other people who don't? Then you make a set of decisions and codify. Sometimes you codify those decisions into law. And in codifying it into law, there are public hearings, there are engagements that you have with the public so that they can say, okay, don't start it in January, start it later on, and all of that. So all of that happens, and all this time you are gradually building people's understanding of the kind of policy that you want to put in place. Then you implement that policy, and then you assess it to see, what is working and what is not working. And so as an example, you could have a policy that says that a lot of people will lie about their income, particularly those that are not in formal employment. So what we're going to do is we're going to access their bank accounts to see how much is coming into the bank every year, and on that basis, set their taxes. And of course, you do that, and then people start putting their money in the bank. They start putting it under their pillows and start buying gold in order to, get over that policy that you've put in place. And so your cycle starts again. So I've got a problem where I have this policy and people are not putting into bank, and then you design a new policy again. So if you do it properly, it is very likely that your electorate actually understands what it is you're trying to do. And when they don't, and just like, people say that culture eats strategy for breakfast, I actually don't agree. I think culture eats badly designed strategy for breakfast, because if you design the strategy properly, you factor in the culture. So it's the same way as policy and communication. If you do policy properly, then that communication will be factored into it from the very beginning.
I hope someone noted that down. I mean, that was really profound, Dr. Joe. Thank you so much. I'm seeing a couple of responses, but there's one that really strikes me regarding the question that I had asked initially, that if strategic communication disappears from your organization, what would break? And somebody says, if strategic communication, Burial actually says, if strategic communications disappear, employee engagement and relationships with stakeholders could break down, ultimately impacting the business process and long-term profitability. I think that, sums up every, single thing that we may think or, have to say regarding the significance or importance of strategic communications. I love the kind of audiences that we have in this room. Please, let's keep it coming. But before we go on, Gifty, I'm coming to you. What have you learned, about the gap between what leadership decides internally and what the public is ready to hear?
I think it's when it comes to policy specifically, and it could even be a policy which is internal amongst your own staff, to say that these are the set of rules where staff cannot dress a certain way to the office. That's, for instance, a policy. To the outside one, I think It's not necessarily between leadership and the public. I think, as Dr. Joe said, it's the stakeholders along the chain, right? If a policy is designed well, is designed right from the ground to say this is a problem, and therefore in this being a problem, we need to find a solution. And in finding the solution, we're building consensus by bringing all these stakeholders together. Of course, every stakeholder will have their own interest and their own positions where they are. So that's where the consensus come in. But if policies are really designed with lots of engagement, stakeholders properly mapped out, all through, there's transparency, there's conversation, before even, the policy is finalized. I think when you get to that, then the real outcome is a win for everybody, because then there's no gap between what the leadership is thinking and what the public is thinking, because each of them had their own positions, and eventually they all arrived at a consensus to say, okay, this policy, we tweak it here, we tweak it there, so everybody is fully represented. And it's also easier to have a buy-in. Of course, there will be policies where you will not do any consultation and you will sort of impose it. And we find that happen every day, right? Even within our own organizations as well. Sometimes staff can go on demonstration because we're introducing a certain policy which is not in their interest. Sometimes it will be the community where the organization is working that will go on demonstration because they have certain policies that are not beneficial, or that does not inure well to the community they are in. So really, for me, I think is when it's really mapped out well across the whole chain. And that's what makes us so strategic as communication professionals, because we don't, unlike marketing, which will deal with the end, which is the customer or the consumer, for strategic communication, you're looking at everybody along the chain. So the broader stakeholders, right? Because you're managing reputation, you're not just managing a brand. So if it's done well, as in policy design itself, you achieve the outcome where consensus is built, everybody is agreed, everybody is aligned. You may not get necessarily what you want. They may not also get necessarily what they want. I mean, a collective bargaining agreement is a good example of what happens internally, right? Management will say this percentage, employees will say that percentage. If you don't go along and you all sort of agree and get to a center point, each side is not happy. So the challenge with the gap between the decision or the leadership and the receiving end is when communication has not facilitated all this engagement and all this consensus building to arrive at a solution. But that's what makes our work quite strategic, because then we're looking at the entire value system and everybody in the ecosystem.
So you need to bring communications from the very get-go, like from the stage when you're
from the problem,
from the beginning.
Yeah, right from the problem. So you don't end up communicating a policy when it's done. Then where was the consensus building? Where was the stakeholder engagement done? Where was the dialogue done? That does not, like Dr. Joe said, then it makes it really a quite inefficient policy.
So this response from Gifty, I mean, is going to bring me to Mr. Paul. There's that misconception that, the moment you announce a policy, then you've communicated it, right? So Mr. Paul, sorry, I think it's a sign. Maybe something needs to happen over there. Like this one that I'm calling you Dr. Paul. So many organizations still believe that publishing a policy is the same as communicating it. But in your own experience, what transforms a policy document into real understanding? And not just understanding, but as acceptance, because it's one thing for people to understand the policy, and it's another thing for them to really accept. And I've seen this come through a lot in organizations where, a policy is being implemented, it's been announced, people understand, they know the reason why you're implementing that policy, but they're not accepting it. They're not, Gifty had mentioned something like that before, but I would like for you, Mr. Paul, to shed more light into this based on your own experience. You're muted, sir.
Yes, thank you so much, Christiana.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so it's important to understand how fundamental communication is. Someone said in the beginning was the words and all that, but I think that the beginning was also the word was communication. The way, the whole point from the government or governance perspective, I mean, the way it should go is that you have someone who is seeking power, and the person has a certain vision, and he tries to communicate that vision to the people. If they accept it, then they elect him. And then from that vision, he will produce policies. And those policies will become programs, which will eventually reflect that ultimate vision. So communication is, the sad thing is that a lot of people in powerful positions or prominent positions don't understand how important communication is. It's the glue that binds everything together.
True.
At every level,
True. Spot
and
on.
it is when people don't understand that you start having that challenge, that gap between the intention, which is reflected in the policy, and the public hostility to that intention. So that is the challenge. But what I will say is that the problem from my experience is that a lot of people in government don't have enough respect for the people. And there's this, if you like, this kind of contempt, for the unwashed masses. They don't have enough regard for them, and it's almost as if they're doing them a favor. But that is actually a big mistake, because the whole point of government is to improve the lives of the people. And how are you going to improve people's lives if you don't respect them or respect their preferences? Sadly, and I must say that, apart from a few islands in government, this kind of contempt for the people is very common. And that also reflects in the fact that the people are not taken into account when policies are being put together. And even when they are announced, they don't make enough effort to make sure that the people can see themselves in those policies. If I may cite a little example from my time in government. When I was in government, there's a part of the ritual of government is that the president will go to the National Assembly and present the budget, and then it's accepted after the process has gone through. And then the finance minister now has to come out and give what they call a budget breakdown. And the budget breakdown is a very technical thing, because that's where they're going to explain why the budget is based on a certain based, for instance, on a certain number of barrels of oil sold, at a certain level, dollars and all that, all kinds of. It's a very technical process, and that's what it ordinarily is. The finance minister coming out to say this is what we're doing and why, and giving all the technical underpinnings of the process. And when I was in government, within my little space, I used to say, this process is for the people. It's not something you wake up the next day and there's a lot of jargon, and few experts understand, and the investors understand, but people don't know what it's about. And I used to say, what is important to the people? What does this mean in the number of new health centers being built? What does it mean for the price of food? What does it mean and all that? And why can't we lead with that? And those technical things can be like part of the background, if you like, And I within the limits of my listen, I used to insist on that we should. In fact, I used to put the experts under pressure to say, okay, what does this mean, for these areas that are more likely to resonate with the people, and please explain it to me and all that. Get the information so that in putting together press releases and other forms of communication, you reflect that. And by doing that, what are you doing? You are making the process of getting them to understand the policies and the benefits of the policies, and also to get their support easier. I can't say this enough. One of the biggest problems in government, I suppose also in business at a certain level, is just people talking to themselves and having this contempt for the people. It is a big problem. And once you have the wrong attitudes, once you forget that the whole purpose of government is to improve the lives of the people, then every other thing is detailed because you're going to fail. You're going to fail. So I think it's important to appreciate that fundamental philosophical
Right.
that the people are the reason for government, and also to understand that you have to respect them and all that. Sometimes to be fair to the people in government, sometimes it's not a very smooth process because the people are also cynical. The people are also sometimes ignorant and angry. I used to tell some of my bosses back in the day that when they get angry about Nigerians, being stubborn, I used to say, don't blame them. The only government they know is the government that chases them off the road with their convoys. That's what they know. So the hostility is just part of the package, and you have to find a way of going through that because you still need them. Because the whole purpose of government is the welfare of the people. So I think that as long as the people understand, the people who are in prominent positions, the elected and appointed people understand the real purpose of government and why the people are central to that purpose, you are going to have all kinds of issues down the line.
Thank you so much, Mr. That's really detailed. See, I don't like to do this, but my reputation as the IABC moderator for this session is on the line. And if I don't do this, the IABC Africa board will not pay me my balance. So I would have to tell us to keep it short in the interest of time, because we're actually in the middle of a lot of people's office time and they want to go back to doing what they're doing. So so that the IABC Africa board will pay me my balance, I would humbly like to ask that we keep it very, very short. Thank you so much. Dr. Joe, I would have loved to ask you this question, but like I said, in the interest of time, because Mr. Pollard, addressed this question around announcing policy and it being the same as communicating it, I'm going to skip that and I'll not ask you anymore, even though I know that there's a lot that you can say about this particular question. So one very important question that somebody has asked, and I would love for you to address, is if you could redesign how government communicates reform across Africa, what is the first thing you would change? Dr. Joe.
Okay, so if you want to keep the answer short, then you must stop asking profound questions that require a lot of explanation.
Well, in IABC, we have very intelligent professionals, and they won't stop, pushing those questions to me, unfortunately.
Okay, so I think the starting point would be where Paul sort of ended, because I found the same thing as well going into the Nigerian government, and the way that I put it was that I was shocked how little people within the secretariat think about people outside the secretariat. So it's like what happens outside the secretariat, nobody cares about, and they can't do anything about it anyway. We're the ones in power, right? So that's the first shock that I found, and that's why that was one of the main things I did as the person leading the reform functions in Nigeria, because all of the reforms that had gone before me had been centered on the public service. So whether it's the monetization policy, pay reform, pension reforms, everything was about the public servant. So if you go to my grandmother in the village, she doesn't care about any of those things. And so that's why my main thing as DG was essentially to shift public service reforms away from the public service and onto the public. So that's why I started. And just like Paul said, when I did a survey of what people wanted me to focus on, what they said was, the problem we have with government is when we come in contact with it. If we don't come in contact with government, we don't have any problem. But when we come in contact with government, and they need to give us a piece of paper, whether it is a passport or a driver's license or a tax clearance or anything, or a national identity card or number. That's when our problem happens with government. So this mentality of you exist to serve the people, you must listen to the people, you must take feedback, you must take abuse, actually. Not in terms of violence, tribalistic, racist kind of abuse, but you must listen to people's dissatisfaction. So again, when I talk to public servants, they find it really, really strange when I define a public servant as a servant of the public. And I say to them that any servant wakes up before their master and doesn't go to bed until after their master goes to bed.
True.
They get spoken to harshly by their master. They don't reply angrily. You wait until their master is calm, and then they explain, oh God, this is why I did this in this way and not in that way. And every servant gets poorly paid. So nothing strange there. So if we can just imbibe that mentality, I think it will shift the way that we design reforms in Africa.
IABC is such a blessing. And for those of you who think that IABC is actually paying me, and you've already started drafting your pitch so that you can come, to be the next moderator, I'm sorry to burst your bubbles, but this is a volunteer-led association. So whatever it is that we do here, we are all volunteers. Njideka is a volunteer. Christine is a volunteer. So if you were drafting your pitch, please just discard that, paper, please. Njideka, you don't need to write me. Don't worry. The moment I do this to my panelists, they already know that they need to move to the next conversation. So Gifty, I'm coming to you. And I'm coming to you because somebody has confirmed that this is, a discussion that needs to be addressed. There's a very important part of communications that, has started, taking its own place in this field, and that's change communications, right? And change communication, I feel like it has existed, for decades, but we never really put a name to it, right? And so now that people have put, they've even started, building courses around change management. People are going to school to study change management because, they want to be able to communicate to their employees in such a way that they don't feel like, they're being forced to do something, or, governments shouldn't, drive a change management or change communications in such a way that the citizens feel like they're being forced or something is being imposed on them. So how do you advise us to manage, communicating, during difficult changes without making people feel like that change is being imposed on them? Gifty, you're muted.
Yeah, hi, sorry. So change in itself is difficult, right? But it's also part of life. I think in communicating change or in navigating change itself, one of the most important elements itself is communication. Because even when you don't know all the answers, or you don't have all the solutions, or you're not sure where everything is going to end up, I think even being able to be honest, to say that I don't have all the answers or I don't have all the solutions in itself is important. Now, with change itself also, you need to take people along, right, from the beginning, right? It's easier for me to buy into change if you are taking me along and if you are engaging me. That way, even when the change is not in my best interest, the fact that, as both panelists said, that, sometimes there's a bit of contempt in terms of how you treat public. If you're showing up with contempt to come and announce it or not doing consultation, then the change is going to be very difficult and almost impossible.
True.
But if you were to come down and say, right, this is what we want to achieve. This is sort of like what the outcome or end goal is. This is where we are. We want to get there. How do we get there? If there's that honesty in the first place to even appreciate, then you can get people to get along with it. But then if it's sort of like, yes, I'm in power, you're in power, or I'm the boss, you're the assistant, then it will be fraught with challenges. And don't forget that a lot of the times change is often announced by leadership, but implementation and execution is on the ground.
True.
And so when you don't have the buy-in, it doesn't matter how much change you want to drive. That change itself will fail by design because there's no consultation. And we also need to see it that everybody has an interest. Change itself is not the issue. It is how the change affects me. That is where the challenge is. So you announcing the change is not my problem. What the change is going to mean to me is where the issue is. If the change is such that I'm going to spend more money in paying taxes, that's the problem. If the change is such that it's about employment and it affects my salary or it affects my position, that in itself is a problem. So you need to do consultation. You need to carry people along. It shouldn't be that you are announcing. Change should be going down at that level because the implementation doesn't often sit with you. Execution is always on the ground.
So as a follow-up to your very insightful insights, Gifty, do you think strategic silence sometimes communicates more effectively than constant messaging? And how do leaders know the difference?
I think, especially when it comes to policy, staying silent could be problematic, right? Remember, staying silent and not having anything to say can be two different things. So I can tell you, Christine, that, oh, Christine, I don't really have any new update, or I'm not really sure of the next step. That's fair. But if I keep quiet, then that's where, because silence always could easily mean that you have something to hide or you're planning something else. So for me, especially when it comes to change, even when there is no new information to share, still go out to the public and explain that, look, we don't have any new updates. If the change doesn't sit with you, if the change sits with you, say, yes, we're doing consultation. Following the consultation, not much has changed. That in itself is communication. So the element of transparency is important, especially when you want to demonstrate that you don't have contempt for the people. That element of transparency, even when you have nothing to say, for me, I think is quite important because once you keep quiet, it means you're planning something or plotting something. It doesn't take away my anxiety.
Thank you very much, Gifty. I would like your take on that, Mr. Paul.
Which part? Strategic silence?
Yes. So can strategic silence sometimes communicate more effectively than constant messaging? And how do leaders know the difference?
Yeah, I support what Gifter said because I was once on a flight in a small plane and we were going through turbulence and the pilot didn't say anything and it was very scary. You know, when people don't know what's going on, it can be very scary. So like she said, it's important to be honest. You can say we're thinking of a solution. You can even turn the tables on them and say, okay, why don't you, if you have any ideas, share with us and all that. Let it be an inclusive process. And like she also said, when policymakers or decision makers at whatever level, when they try to pretend or act like they're God, it's usually a problem. There's nothing wrong with being a little human, and saying, I'm not quite sure at this point, but I'm working towards something, and people, sometimes that can make people trust you a bit more because you are not just some implacable God, So, yeah, but there's also, so strategic silence it can be an asset But you have to define that silence. It doesn't have to be like saying absolutely nothing while the plane is in turbulence, so to speak. It can be like just not coming up with something because you have nothing to say, but you can now have a conversation around the fact that you may need new ideas, you need some ideas, or you are going through something and all that. So don't leave a void, but you can be silent to the extent that you're not proposing anything new. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Paul. Thank you for that. Dr. Joe, I have a series of questions for you, but I want you to catch your breath, so I'll come back to you. Gifty, so mergers and crises, force organizations to speak with one voice, at the exact moment when internal alignment, can be the hardest. What's the discipline that you'd say is the one that makes, this possible under pressure? What's that discipline?
I think for me, having been through different transitions and also been through a merger, I would say planning ahead, because sometimes, even in crisis, right, you can have scenario planning. And I mean, I love that about my last role, where we plan everything from little incident to the big incident. And within that, because that's also necessary for business continuity, it's also necessary for reputational risk. It's also necessary for even business sustainability. All those are necessary. So plan a little bit, even with mergers and acquisitions, the moment you decide this is what we're going to do, or even with transitions, plan, have time to plan, have the stakeholders at the table, all the internal stakeholders that need to be represented there, have that planned. What are we going to say? How are we positioning this? Because that even helps you in terms of framing. Because sometimes the change could be that we're no longer fit for purpose as we are. So we need to change or we need to evolve, which completely makes sense. But then you'd have to reframe it in a way that would be acceptable to the different stakeholders. And here your stakeholders vary. I mean, for every organization, the public, the government, the regulator, the consumer, the supply chain, everybody is in there. So for me, I think planning is necessary. But if you don't have time to plan and it's a crisis which has happened impromptu and you need to make quick decisions, I think once you've identified who speaks on behalf of the organization, holding statements are always one easy way to buy time while you try to build consensus around it. So in the past, when it's impromptu, a holding statement buys you at least 24 to 48 hours to dig in and then come with one voice. That is, if you don't already have a document that enables you to speak with one voice. So for me, that's always been quite helpful. As scanty as possible, because then you have time to look into the other details.
Thank you so much for that, Gifty. So for those who do not know, Gifty is a lead consultant at Communications, and she advises organizations and senior leaders on reputation framing, agenda setting, and crisis issues management. So you can always reach out to Gifty for such services. I need to check on my audience. Can somebody remind me of a simple rule for this webinar? I just need to know that you're not sleeping on your laptop. It looks like I'm only getting responses from the same set of people, Madam Shola, Bulu, So I need to make sure that everyone is still awake. Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much, Faith. Thank you, Faith. So we're going into the industry insights, questions that we've received. And, I'll just touch on one. And I would love for our panelists to address, this question. Okay, you won't judge me. Thank you so much. You're so kind. So the question is, if you could at what point in the policy process should strategic communication begin, and why is that timing so critical to successful implementation? Maybe we should start from Dr. Joe now.
To save you time, I've answered it already. I took you through the planning cycle. using tax as an example. So it starts right from when you identify the problem, and then you start to engage people to make them to realize that there is a problem, and then you go all the way through the cycle.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joe. That's very concise. Gifty, do you want to touch on that?
I agree with Dr. Joe. For me, I think it starts right from the very beginning, right? And it's not just the stakeholders you're engaging, even the PSAs you would put out, public service announcement you would put out, even when the consultations are being done, inviting reporters in or writing news stories that you're engaging, because not everybody may necessarily hear of it, but when you put it out, because you're engaging in smaller groups, but when you also put it out through news stories, social media, everywhere, to say, today we met so and so on this policy, on that, I think that also gives a buy-in. And sometimes also you could have detractors who are mischievous. You would have engaged them, but they could pretend you never engaged them. So when you also do this and you put it out, it also cuts the mischief a little bit, but from the beginning.
Thank you so much, Gifty. Mr. Paul?
It seems to have dropped off.
Oh, okay. Maybe you'll join us. You'll join us again. But while we wait for Mr. Paul to rejoin, there's this comment from Madam Shola Bulu that I would like to read to us all. And she says, on strategic silence, I think the risk and benefits need to be tightly weighed if an issue has played out in the public space. If it has played out online and is very negative, there had better be a good reason for strategic silence, because the digital footprint will show that this very bad allegation came up and you were silent. True. Even if you managed it behind the scenes, the negative allegation remains unchallenged online. If left unaddressed, it would be difficult to debunk post factum many years later. I mean, that's really brilliant. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for that contribution. And we're open to many more contributions. Please share your insights and I'll be sure to look through and, read them. I don't know if Mr. Paul is back with us yet.
It doesn't seem to be, but can I just chip in on this issue of strategic silence?
Please.
Because I've worked at the very heart of government at very high levels, there are times you need strategic silence. For instance, you don't want to cause panic in the society. So there are things, it's not everything you hear, you say, right? It's not everything you're aware of that you communicate. So there are times that it is responsible to be strategically silent. Sometimes also you don't want to glorify violence or terrorists by giving them too much of a platform. Okay, you acknowledge there's a problem, but you don't then start playing their TikTok videos and all of that. And just finally, the way that these things, that over communication can cause a problem. I'll just give you one very quick example. There was a study done on communication, on corruption between the UK and Turkey. And while people perceive Turkey to be at sort of 70% corruption level, they perceive the UK to be only at about 20%. But when a study was actually done, asking people, okay, have you actually paid a bribe in the last 1 year? The results in the two countries were exactly identical. The difference was that, like Nigerians, the Turks talk about corruption all the time. And so you get this perception that it is everywhere. Just like you get someone in the US who think that all of Nigeria is a slum and all of Africa, people are hanging off trees. And me, that I'm here, will think that everybody in America is shooting every few minutes, and if I just land, I can be shot to death. So this is what over communication does. But I agree with Gifty and Paul about the need to use it selectively.
Thank you so much.
you
Thank you
don't
so
communicate.
much, Dr. Joe. Guys, if only IABC can give you this kind of, panel lists. So if you're not a member, you should actually sign up. Reach out to Njideka or Chisim, and they would guide you appropriately if you're not a member yet. Mr. Paul is back. Welcome back, Mr. Paul. So sorry about your internet issue. We were addressing the industry insight question around, at what point in the policy process should strategic communication begin? And why is that timing so critical to successful implementation? Dr. Joe and Gifty, have been so kind enough to share their insight on this. And I would really love for you to also share yours.
Thank you. Could you please repeat the question?
At what point in the policy process should strategic communication begin? And why is that timing so critical to successful implementation?
Yeah, I think it should start as early as possible, but it's important to also keep in mind that communication is not only about, does not start and end with issuing statements. I presume that as part of the process, because communication should be that policy formulation should include communication. So communication is playing a role from the very beginning. But you have to now decide at what point you're going to engage the public. And even after you've taken that decision, you have to decide who is going to speak. Is it the professional spokespeople or spokespersons for the organization? Or is it the head of the organization? Or is it some beneficiary of the policy or something? Because one of the things that we should also keep in mind is that you have to keep in mind who is likely to be the most credible person to speak for that policy. Sometimes you find that you get the best response or the best distance from when communication is not too professionally delivered and too smooth and full of all the distance and all that. Sometimes someone who is a beneficiary, the example that Dr. Joe talked about, terrorism and all that, sometimes maybe the best person to speak for the effectiveness of an anti-terror strategy may be a beneficiary who is not very articulate, who is not just communicating how the process of the rescue went and how family took it and all that, or the terror that whatever saved from. So it might be someone who is not really a professional spokesperson that might say something that will be better believed by the public. Yeah, so there are different dimensions: when to speak, how to speak, and all that, and
Amazing.
And as a copywriter, among other things, I know that sometimes in communication, when it is not so smooth, depending on the audience, when it is more human, sometimes it can go much, when it's natural, it can go much, much farther. But of course, I'm not recommending Olodo uprising.
You just had to say that. Thank you so much, Mr. Paul. So I know that Oluwa Sayo has a question, but I would love for you to specify or to just let me know who to address this question to. But while you're doing that, there's a comment I saw in the chat from Maria Egunjobi, and Maria says, no, not this one. Yeah, this one. I love the pointers from Dr. Joe about communication and how that shapes global perception. I like to call that infobasity, Maria. I like to call that infobasity. Okay, great. So I have one last question. Yes, before we come to the end of this webinar and before we answer the question from Oluwajimisai, which will be the last question we'll be addressing today. If you want to know more, you feel free to join IABC. Admin has already dropped the email address to reach out to. If you would like to sign up, please feel free to do that. And the last question for me, to my panelists, would be if you could advise policymakers on just one strategic communication principle that would dramatically improve policy outcomes, what would it be? If you could advise policymakers on just one strategic communication principle that would dramatically improve policy outcomes, what would it be? And please keep it to 2 sentences if you can. Thank you so much. Let's start with Gifty, because Gifty is smiling at me.
I think for me, it will be use strategic communications well and engage from the very beginning. Also focus on what is necessary, because sometimes in policy formulation, there can be a lot of noise. So from the very beginning, involve strategic communication and focus on what the issues are, and use it to achieve consensus building, because no policy works without implementers. Implementation is always necessary, but as policy formulators, you would have to come down to the ground for implementation. So to have a good policy, speak to as many stakeholders as possible, use strategic communications, engage from the very beginning, and build consensus around. It may not necessarily always end up the way you started, because when you get to the ground, you'll find that there are different challenges and different problems. Sometimes even there are structural issues with funding, right? You have a beautiful policy, but there's no budget to do implementation. When you get on the ground, you'll find all these things out. So when you engage from the very beginning, you will understand what the issues are, and it helps you formulate policies better than having beautiful documents that, when it comes to execution, really, either by design or by funding or by consensus, execution is almost impossible, and you'd have to spend money to go back to the ground zero again. And when policy also fails, look at why it failed, and communicate that and come around it. There's nothing embarrassing about a policy having failed. I think what you do after it has failed is what is important. And especially for strategic communication, use us, bring us in early so we can be part of the design process.
Bring us in early so we can be part of the design processes. Amazing. Thank you so much, Gifty. Dr. Joe?
My advice would be, don't listen to anybody that gives you just one strategy for how you're going to make your policies more effective. It's what Chimamanda called the danger of the single story. Taking a multiplicity of approaches and choose the one that works for each particular occasion or each particular policy. So what works for one policy may not work for another. What worked yesterday may not work today. I think the thing is the constant recalibration of how you deliver to the public. That's what needs to guide everything you do.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Joe. Mr. Paul?
Yeah, that's quite a question, but there's so many dimensions. But what I would say is that you should keep in mind what really, really matters, and that is the audience and the target. Keep that in mind, and both in designing the messaging and the campaign, and also in terms of how you engage them with respect in a way that they can relate. It's important to keep that in mind, you know. And I would also add that you should focus on having a foundation In fact, I was telling a friend the other day that one of the things if I'm going to write in the book on communication, one of the chapters will be know when to stop being brilliant. This is important to remind ourselves that if you don't have a foundation, all these things will not work. So the routine part of communication, is 80% of it. You just keep building and building and building so that when something goes wrong, you have something to work with. So build the foundation, Whatever is the vision, whatever is the mission of that organization or government, make sure that you keep communicating it, and when you do that, and then there's crisis, then there's a context in which the public can believe you, but if you don't have that foundation, your brilliance may not be enough. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Paul. I know that my IABC employers will be giving me side eye right now, but there's this question from Oluwajimisayo to Mr. Paul, and I would love for you to, in 2 sentences, respond to this question. And he or she says, if a policy cannot survive the court of public opinion, was it ever really a good policy in a democracy? Or does a good, in quotes, good, now have to include communicable, in quotes, as a non-negotiable design principle from day one? I don't know if that question makes sense to you, but that's
I'm trying to follow you, but I got the first part. If you can try again.
Yeah, so if a policy cannot survive the court of public opinion, was it ever really a good policy in a democracy? Or does good now have to include communicable as a non-negotiable design principle from the one?
Yeah, what I would say is that I can imagine a scenario where a policy may not survive. Communication is a very useful thing, but it is not magic. Sometimes you can do your best, and the situation or the context or even the amount of time you have may not be enough.
True.
Yeah. So you just do your best and hope for the best and all that. But then that's why the point I made about if this thing come about having a foundation is so important. When you have a foundation, whether it's a personal reputation or a government reputation or an organizational reputation, when you have a foundation and then things go wrong, people will give you the benefit of doubt, but if you don't have a foundation, then there's nothing to work with.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mr. Paul.
Sorry, can I add? Can I add? Yeah.
Please go first.
Okay, so mine is to say that a policy failure is not necessarily a communication issue. A policy can fail by design. It doesn't matter how much you try to communicate it. We need to detach the two. A policy can be bad in itself. No matter how much you communicate it, no matter how much resources you put into it. And there are so many examples of this that even as a communications professional, you get frustrated because you yourself know that this policy is just bad by design, right? And it can range from policies which are politically related to policies which cripple jobs and employment to policies which are so self-centered and self-serving. I just wanted to make that point that we shouldn't blame ourselves for when policy fails because a policy can fail by the design of it, not necessarily even communication related.
So I've been writing. I know that Dr. Joe wants to go. Maybe Dr. Joe, please go first.
Okay, so just quickly to say that people need to be led. Okay, so you cannot just run a populist government where everything you do is dictated by what people want. Sometimes you need to take decisions and have policies that people may not like, but ultimately will be in their best interest. Okay. And then just finally on just the question about at what points do you include strategic communication? There are actually times that it is better not to communicate. So there are certain things that you may want to do that if you start consulting on it, the masses that will kill it will have time to organize and assemble. And so there are a number of things that we've done that people knew about it first after we had gazetted it as government. So that's why I said that it can just depend there's no single approach. The general rule is consult from the beginning, but it is not every time that that is the best approach. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can we leave some comments, to her panelists in the chat? Can we say something nice, say something kind to them? How have they made you feel today? What have you learned? Do you like policy now? If you were like me, who didn't like policy, have they been able to recruit us? Let them know in the chat. And please connect with them over LinkedIn. I've noted a couple of things, but I just want to pick one thing from each panelist. And from Gifty says policy failure isn't necessarily a communication issue. Policy can fail simply because it is bad by design. Mr. Paul says in the beginning was the work of communication. That means you need to include your communicators from the very beginning. Dr. Joe says culture hits badly designed strategy for breakfast. So what you used to know before, you need to unlearn that. Thank you so much to our panelists. I would love to hand over to Njideka right now, but I just want to say thank you so much for such an amazing, I feel so honored. I feel like I need to bill IABC in pounds, but over to you, Njideka. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And in fact, the entire IABC is super grateful that you all have stayed until the very end. Before we say goodbye for now, we'd like to invite you to our conference, African conference, which is coming up in October at Cape Town. We have quite a number of African leaders that would actually be there. So you can imagine if you can get such insights from this, imagine what you're going to get at the African conference. Please reach out to our email, or you can just go on the website, IABC, and then you find information about the conference. And I think I should also add that the early birds also gets, a discount as well. Thank you.